Welcome to this fourth video on the series of lectures on special theory of relativity. In this video, I will consider two important consequences of Lorentz transformation, that is length contraction and time dilation, and also a couple of examples of the same. It is important to note that in special theory of relativity, one must be very watchful about who measures what about an event and how the measurement is made. The consequence of special theory of relativity can be very counterintuitive and contradictory to everyday experience. Length contraction. Let's consider an object at rest along the x dash axis of the frame s dash. Of course, the frame s dash is moving with a velocity v with respect to s, and therefore the object is also moving with a velocity v with respect to s. Let the coordinates of the ends of the rod in the frame s dash be x1 dash and x2 dash respectively as shown in the figure. Now, the length of the rod for an observer in s dash to whom the rod is at rest will be L dash, which I will call as L naught, equal to x2 dash minus x1 dash. Now we call this L dash or L naught as the proper length. By definition, proper length of an object is the length of an object measured by an observer with respect to whom the object is at rest. Now we ask the question, what is the length of the object as measured by an observer S with respect to whom the object is moving? Clearly, the length of the object with respect to the observer S will be L equal to x2 minus x1, where x2 and x1 are the coordinates of the end points of the rod with respect to the observer S. It is to be noted, and this is important, that the coordinates x2 and x1 should be measured or recorded by the observer in S at the same instant of time for a meaningful measurement of the length of the object. Now, from the Lorentz transformation equation, we know that x2 dash can be written as k times x2 minus v t1. Similarly, x1 dash can be written as k times x1 minus v t2, and therefore x2 dash minus x1 dash will be equal to k times x2 minus x1 minus v into t2 minus t1. Since the coordinates of the ends of the rod in the frame S should be measured at the same instant, T2 equal to T1 will be equal to some T. Hence, we can get x2 dash minus x1 dash will be equal to k times x2 minus x1, or I can write L naught equal to k times L, where L is the length of the rod measured by the observer S with respect to whom the rod is moving. From this, we solve for L naught as L naught is equal to L divided by root of 1 minus v squared by c squared, where we have substituted for k as k equal to 1 by root of v squared minus c squared. Hence, finally we obtain L equal to L naught times root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. Note, L is the length of the rod which is moving with respect to the observer S. This length is referred to as the improper length. We also observe that root of 1 minus v squared by c squared is less than 1 for v less than c, and therefore it obviously follows that L must be less than L naught. Thus, when a rod moves, we can say moving rods appear shorter in their direction of motion. This is referred to as length contraction. In the next slide, I will look at some of the key points regarding this length contraction concept. Let me once again distinguish between proper length and improper length. The length of an object when it is at rest with respect to an observer is called its proper length. The length of an object that is moving with respect to an observer is known as improper length. Note that improper length will always be less than proper length. In other words, the greatest length of an object is always its proper length. Okay, the first point about length contraction is the following. The length or space interval between 2 points is not absolute. The length of an object is greatest when it is at rest relative to the observer. When it moves with a velocity v relative to the observer, its measured length is contracted in the direction of motion by a factor root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. The second point is that the length or the dimension of an object in a direction perpendicular or normal to the direction of motion of the object remains unaffected, that is, it does not contract. The third and probably the very important point is that length contraction effect is reciprocal for the inertial observer. This means if there is a rod which is stationary in the frame S dash and the length of this rod is measured from the frame S, it appears to be contracted. Conversely, if there is a rod which is stationary in the frame S and if this rod's length is measured by an observer in S dash, it also appears to be contracted. To dilate means to become larger. Another consequence of Lorentz transformation equation is that the time interval between two events is affected by the relative motion between the observer and what is being observed. As a result, a clock that moves relative to an observer ticks or runs slowly than it does when it is at rest with respect to the observer. This implies that all processes, including those of life, will occur more slowly to an observer when they occur in an inertial frame moving with respect to the observer. This effect is known as time dilation. Thus, a clock ticks fastest when it is at rest with respect to an observer. When it moves with a speed v relative to the observer, its rate is measured to have been slowed down. Let us now look at the expressions which will help us to understand time dilation. Let's consider a clock which is at rest relative to the frame S dash at a position x dash. Let the frame S dash, obviously along with the clock, move along the positive x direction with respect to the frame S with a velocity v. Let us suppose that an event, say for instance the setting off of a flare, occurs at x dash at the instant t1 dash as recorded by the clock present at x dash. Let another event, maybe setting off of another flare, occur again at x dash at a later instant of time, say t2 dash. Clearly, the time interval between the two events for an observer in S dash is delta t dash equal to t2 dash minus t1 dash. Now the question is, what is the time interval between these two events as viewed from the frame S? Let the events as seen from the frame S occur at the times t1 and t2 respectively for the observer S. Note that the clock in S dash is fixed at x dash to record the instants t2 dash and t1 dash of both the events, but the times t1 and t2 recorded by the observer S are recorded from different clocks placed at x1 and x2 in S. From the inverse Lorentz transformation, we have the following two equations. T2 equals k times t2 dash plus v by c squared x dash, and t1 equals k times t1 dash plus v by c squared x dash. Hence, the time interval delta t, which is t2 minus t1, for the observer S will be delta t equal to t2 minus t1. Substituting the values for t2 and t1, delta t is k times t2 dash minus t1 dash. Substituting for k, we get delta t equals delta t dash divided by root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. Clearly, since root of 1 minus v squared by c squared is less than 1, 1 over root of 1 minus v squared by c squared will be greater than 1. Hence, it follows that delta t is greater than delta t dash. This means the observer in S records a larger time interval. This means from his point of view, the clock in S dash appears to have slowed down. For instance, if the observer in S records delta t to be 10 seconds for the two events, then he observes that the clock in S dash shows only delta t dash equal to, let us say, 6 seconds. This means the moving clock is running slowly. Alternately, it also means that an interval of 10 seconds in his frame, that is the S frame, corresponds to an interval of 6 seconds in the moving frame, which means an interval of 1 second in his frame will correspond to 0.6 second in the moving frame. This means that time is being stretched or it is dilated. It's very important to distinguish between the terms proper time and improper time. There are several ways in which these can be defined, and let us now understand what they mean. Proper time. The time interval between two events that occur at the same place in a reference frame is known as proper time. Alternately, it may also be defined as the time interval recorded by a clock that is at rest with respect to the observer. In other words, attached to the observer's body. Or there is a third way of defining proper time. It is simply the time interval measured by a single clock at one place. Now, improper time. This is the time interval recorded between two events that occur at different places in a frame of reference. Or alternately, it's also the time interval recorded by a clock that is not attached to the observer. It can also be defined as the time interval measured by two different clocks at two different places. The important point to really know is that I will now describe a natural phenomena in which we can see the effects of special theory of relativity, namely time dilation and length contraction. Muons are unstable particles which are created in many nuclear reactions. They are also created at high altitudes, about 10.4 km by cosmic rays. A muon decays by the following modes as shown in the slide. A muon plus decays to a positron and two neutrinos, which are muon neutrinos. Similarly, a negative muon decays to an electron and two neutrinos. Now, the mean life of the above process, that is the average lifetime of the muon before it decays, has been measured to a high degree of accuracy, and it is 2.2 microsecond. In other words, when a muon is at rest with respect to observer, it will decay in a time t0, which is equal to 2.2 microsecond. In other words, the proper lifetime of the muon is 2.2 microsecond. Now, the muons produced in the upper atmosphere move with a speed close to speed of light. In fact, at a speed of 2.994 into 10 to the power of 8 meter per second. Now, this is about 0.998 times c. So, what is the distance they can travel before they will decay? Simple physics tells you that x dash must be equal to v into t0, which is equal to 2.994 into 10 to the power of 8 into 2.2 times 10 to the power of minus 6, which is 0.66 kilometer. So, for the observer on the earth, we should not be able to see any muon at the sea level, because we find that it can travel only about 0.66 kilometer before it decays. However, cosmic ray muons are profusely found at sea level. So, how have they managed to reach the sea level? if they decay in 2.2 microseconds and travel only 0.66 kilometer from a height of 10.4 kilometer where they are formed? The answer actually lies in time dilation. Note that the lifetime of the muon, that is T naught equal to 2.2 microsecond, is for an observer riding the muon, for whom the muon will always be at rest with respect to him. In other words, it is the proper lifetime of the muon, as I already mentioned. For an earthbound observer, the creation of the muon and its decay are two different events that happen at two different places, is it not? Thus, for the earthbound observer, the lifetime of the muon will be T equal to T naught divided by root of 1 minus V squared by C squared. By substituting the value of V as 0.998 C, we obtain T equal to 34.8 microsecond. That means, as far as the Earth observer is concerned, the muon lives for 34.8 microsecond. So, in this lifetime, the muon can cover a distance which is given by x is equal to Vt. So, substituting for V and T, we obtained, lo and behold, 10.4 kilometer. Hence, the muons hurtling down towards us at a speed of 0.998 c have their lifetime dilated in our frame. The moving muons have a lifetime 16 times larger than those at rest. That is, although the lifetime of the muon in its own frame is 2.2 microsecond, it can reach the ground from an altitude of 10.4 kilometer because in the frame in which the altitude is measured, that is the Earth, the measured lifetime of the muon is 34.8 microsecond. Beautiful, isn't it? There is this another explanation of this phenomena based on length contraction. If an observer is riding the muon, he is in a frame that is moving at a speed 0.998 c, and hence the muon's lifetime will be 2.2 microsecond proper lifetime, since the muon is at rest with respect to him. So now, what is the distance that the muon can travel before it decays according to this observer? As we already worked out, it will be 0.66 kilometer. Now, what is the distance or depth of 10.4 kilometer, that is distance of the Earth's surface from the atmosphere where the muon is created, going to be for the observer riding the muon? In other words, how far will the Earth appear to the rider on the muon? Due to length contraction, the distance will be d naught will be d equal to root of 1 minus V squared by C squared into d naught. Well, we substitute the values of V as C and d naught, we obtain d equal to 66 kilometer. So, from the point of view of the muon observer, the muon is covering only 0.66 kilometer because the length of 10.4 kilometer is actually contracted to 0.66 kilometer. This is extremely wonderful, is it not? So we see how special theory of relativity shows up some effects which are counterintuitive. I will explain a very interesting phenomena, a very classic phenomena in special theory of relativity known as twin paradox. Let us assume that there are two twins, say E and A. One twin, E, who remains on Earth, while the other twin, say A, goes on a high velocity time trip to visit a different planet. According to the Earthling, the returning astronaut has aged less because she travelled at a high velocity which slowed down her clock and therefore must be younger. The paradox arises when we take the astronaut's point of view. Looking back onto the Earth, the astronaut A, she sees that her Earth sibling E is moving away at high speed away from her. During her return trip, the Earth seems to be approaching at high speed. Therefore, the astronaut sibling A concludes that the Earthling's clock must have slowed down. Both think that the other is younger. Now, who is right? The resolution of this twin paradox can be done by using the general theory of relativity argument. It is to be noted that the journey of the astronaut, that is the rocket twin A, involves deceleration and acceleration and therefore she is not in an inertial frame. Acceleration during takeoff, deceleration while reaching the destination, and acceleration again during takeoff for the return journey, and finally deceleration to land on the earth. Hence, the astronaut twin A cannot strictly apply special theory of relativity, which applies only to non-accelerating or inertial frames of reference. The earthling B, on the other hand, did not experience any acceleration. Therefore, she can use special relativity to determine time. So, the earthling sibling E is right in concluding that her sibling A, who was in the rocket, has indeed aged less. The astronaut felt the accelerating forces during takeoff, turnaround, and landing. She cannot use special relativity and requires a more general theory called general relativity. It turns out that acceleration cannot be distinguished from gravity, and that gravity also slows down clocks. Her clock lost time during the acceleration and deceleration period, and that actually kept her hanger. Hence, E is aged, the earthling E, is aged more than the astronaut sibling A. And the paradox is resolved using the general theory of relativity, which is of course beyond the scope of this material. General theory of relativity applies even to accelerating frames of reference. There's another point I would like to make. The time dilation in special and general relativity are slightly different. There is a subtle difference between the time dilation in special relativity, constant accelerating frames, and in general relativity, which also applies to accelerated frames. Two observers moving with constant velocity are equivalent. Thus, both have to come to the same conclusion, that is, the other's clock is slow. In other words, time dilation is reciprocal. This causes the perplexing contradiction of their time measurement, and hence the twin paradox as seen from STR. If one observer is accelerated, such as the astronaut in this case, the extra time dilation from general relativity affects only the accelerated clock, and therefore both observers will agree on that only the accelerated frame of reference will see a dilation of time. With that, we come to the end of video number 4 on special theory of relativity. In this, we discussed two of the main effects of Lorentz transformation, length contraction and time dilation, and also described a natural phenomena, the decay of muon in the upper atmosphere, and saw how it can be understood based on either the time dilation idea or the length contraction idea. We also briefly described the twin paradox and saw that it cannot be resolved from special theory of relativity. The paradox requires a more general theory called the general theory of relativity, which applies to accelerated frames of reference as well. In the next video, we will look at the velocity addition theorem, or how velocity transforms from one frame to another frame in special theory of relativity. Thank you very much for viewing this video. I would once again like to acknowledge the textbook by Robert Resnick, Introduction to Special Relativity, Wiley Student Edition 2014. I strongly urge all of you to go through this textbook.